When he finally breaks the silence, the first instinct may be to react emotionally. You may feel a rush of thoughts, memories, and questions flooding your mind. Why now? What does he want? Does he feel guilty? Is this a sign to hope again? This emotional storm can tempt you to pour everything out at once. Your pain, your confusion, your longing, or even your anger. But this is where power is either lost or reclaimed. You don't respond to gain clarity from him. You respond to show clarity within yourself. And that begins by refusing to react emotionally and choosing instead to respond intentionally. There's a vast difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is raw, impulsive, and driven by emotion. It is often fueled by unresolved feelings, pain, betrayal, loneliness, or desire. Reactions feel good in the moment because they release the emotional pressure that has been building during the silence. But they often come at the cost of dignity, peace, and control. On the other hand, a response is measured. It is crafted in the quiet space between stimulus and decision. A response requires thought, composure, and emotional maturity. It is a reflection of who you have become, not what you are still trying to process. And he breaks the silence. First, he's not just opening the door for a conversation. He's unknowingly presenting a mirror. That moment reveals who you are now, not who you were when he left, not who you were when the silence began, but who you are today, after surviving the absence, after facing yourself, after building inner strength in quiet solitude. If you react emotionally, you surrender that progress, but when you respond intentionally, you preserve the power you earned while he was gone. The space between no contact and the first message is sacred. It's the place where you found pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing. It's where you learned to sleep without their good night texts, where you picked up the phone and put it down, learning that self-restraint is its own kind of power. You fought with silence, battled memories, and sat with uncertainty. So when that message finally arrives, it doesn't deserve your pain. It deserves your poise. Because that message is not your rescue, it's a ripple. And you've already become your own anchor. Choosing to respond intentionally means pausing before you reply. Not to craft the perfect sentence, not to calculate how to get a reaction from him, but to check in with yourself. Are you responding from your healed self or your hurting self? Are you responding to reclaim connection or to assert your self-respect? That difference is everything. Because power is not in pretending you don't care. It's in knowing that even if you do care, you no longer need their words to validate your worth. There's power. Fred Jackson was one of England's biggest. People often believe that silence is a punishment. But real silence, when embraced, is a classroom. And the lesson is this: you are not defined by who shows up. You are defined by how you carry yourself when they don't. The person who breaks the silence might expect the old version of you, the one who was available, emotional, desperate for answers. But if you've truly done the work during the silence, the response you give will feel different. Not cold, not angry, just centered, balanced, clear. And that kind of clarity confuses people who are expecting to find you where they left you. Your intentional response may be brief, yet it speaks volumes. It says, I respect myself now more than I crave your attention. It says, I've learned how to be whole in your absence, and I'm not trading that wholeness for the illusion of closeness. This isn't arrogance, this is alignment. A reaction screams for validation. A response whispers self-control. Silence forces us to deal with the raw truth of our attachments. We begin to see which emotions belong to love and which belong to fear. Love is calm, Fear is restless. Love trusts. Fear obsesses. So when the silence ends, the reaction often comes from fear. Fear of being abandoned again, of being used, of falling back into a cycle that took everything to escape. But a response comes from love. Love for self, love for peace, love for truth. That's why you don't rush to reply. You allow yourself to process. You allow your soul to speak, not just your wounds. It is in this moment, this seemingly small exchange, that you draw the boundary. Not just with him, but with the version of yourself that used to settle. You're no longer here to perform for someone's comfort. You're here to protect your peace. When he breaks the silence, it's an opportunity to check if you've really broken the pattern. You don't owe him closure. You don't owe him an explanation. But if you choose to speak, let it be from intention, not injury. Let it be measured, not emotional. Let it be powerful, not pitiful. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It just exists. Quietly, confidently, and without the need for approval. When the silence stretches between two people, it can feel unbearable. The human mind craves closure, clarity, and communication. But in that very space where no words are spoken, something sacred happens. Not always between you and the other person, but within you. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of opportunity. An opportunity to look inward, to strip away all the noise, and face yourself with honesty. When he goes silent, it may feel like abandonment, rejection, or punishment. But when he finally breaks the silence, you must understand something vital. The most powerful transformation already happened inside you while he was gone. He may believe he's the one reinitiating the connection, but what he doesn't see is the version of you that was born in the quiet. You didn't spend that time waiting. You spent it rising. The silence you were forced to sit in became the forge for your emotional strength. While he withdrew, you were faced with the discomfort of solitude, and from that solitude you began to find peace. You began to understand your triggers, your patterns, your pain, and your potential. You began to confront the reasons you clung so tightly, and you started to release them. You realized that the silence was not a punishment. It was a mirror. It's easy to believe that nothing is happening in the silence, but real growth doesn't make noise. When he breaks the silence, first, it's tempting to believe that things are about to change, that he holds the key to reconnection. But what if the real transformation wasn't in him returning, but in you no longer needing him too? That is the essence of your evolution. The silence matured you. It didn't harden you, it refined you. You no longer see the world through desperate eyes. You now see with discernment, from a place of grounded energy. This growth didn't come easily. There were nights you wanted to reach out. There were moments when the silence screamed louder than words ever could. You battled thoughts that told you it was your fault, that if only you had said something differently, maybe he would have stayed. You questioned your worth, but over time, those questions led you to answers, not from him, but from within. And those answers rewired your self-perception. You stopped chasing explanations and began embodying acceptance. So when he breaks the silence and sends that message or makes that call, understand that this is not your cue to revert back to who you were. It's your test to stand in who you've become. You are not the same person who once begged for breadcrumbs of attention. You are not the same version of yourself who measured their worth based on someone else's consistency. Silence taught you to validate yourself, to listen to your intuition, and to stop overextending in hopes of being chosen. And when he returns, he's not returning to the version of you he left. He's speaking to a soul that has tasted independence, a mind that has found clarity, and a heart that has healed, not completely, but enough to no longer settle. And that's why your response must reflect your transformation. It's not about being cold or detached. It's about being centered and aware. You now know what it feels like to stand on your own emotional feet. That knowing should guide your words, your tone, and your expectations. There's something deeply powerful in being able to hear from someone who once went silent and not feel the same emotional storm you would have felt weeks or months ago. That calm, that's your proof. That's your growth made visible. You don't need to over-explain yourself. You don't need to overcompensate. You don't need to reignite what was. You simply need to remain aligned with the self you built in his absence. Your value was never in how quickly you could fix the silence. Your value was in how you handled yourself during it. You took time to read, to reflect, to understand your emotional blueprint. You realize that not all silence is rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. And through that redirection, you found strength in stillness. You learned how to self-soothe, how to detach, how to allow people to leave without losing yourself in the process. That is spiritual muscle. That is emotional power. Now that he's returned, you have a choice. Do you invite him back into the version of your life that's been upgraded? Or do you recognize that his silence created the space you needed to become who you are now? Either way, the power is yours. Not because you're trying to control the outcome, but because you've already mastered the part of the process that mattered most, your inner response to silence. No one can see how deeply you've changed unless you show it. And you show it not by what you say when he breaks the silence, but by how you carry yourself as someone who no longer fears being alone. You've been there, you've been through it, and you've come out more in tune, more aware, and more powerful than ever before. And when he breaks the silence first, there's a subtle but crucial shift in energy. Suddenly, after days or even weeks of silence, your phone lights up or a message comes through and your heart may skip a beat. But this is the moment that defines everything, not because of what he says, but because of what you do next. You're no longer the person who waits for validation. You've outgrown that role. Now, your power lies in your ability to assess, not react, not assume, but observe and evaluate the intention behind his words. You're not looking at the surface. You're studying the energy underneath. Words can be dressed in politeness, even affection, but the energy behind them doesn't lie. A simple hey can carry multiple messages depending on the emotional state, motives, or guilt the sender is experiencing. He may be checking in out of curiosity, loneliness, boredom, or even guilt, not all of which are healthy reasons to re-engage. That's why it's no longer about what's said. It's about how you feel when you read it. Are you feeling calm or triggered? Do you sense respect or manipulation? Is there authenticity in the message, or is it designed to pull you back into a cycle? You have to train yourself to read energy, not just language. Anyone can type, "I miss you," but are those words backed by changed behavior? Are they rooted in realization or convenience? Because you now understand that a return is not always a revival. It's sometimes just a test to see if you're still where they left you. And if you've done the inner work, if you've sat in silence long enough to hear your own truth, then you know how to listen beneath the words. You become emotionally intelligent enough to recognize the difference between effort and empty effort. Energy speaks before words do. There's a difference between someone reaching out with humility and accountability and someone who's just fishing for reaction. You must become fluent in that language. When he contacts you, take a breath, and examine what you're really feeling, not just what you're hoping for. Is your body tightening? Are you anxious, nervous, overly excited? Those feelings are signals. They tell you whether your nervous system feels safe or threatened, whether your spirit is welcoming the message or warning you. And your job is to listen, not just with your ears, but with your intuition. You no longer engage to fill an emotional void. You engage only when it aligns with your peace. If his message carries the energy of confusion, you don't step into that space hoping to bring clarity. That's not your role anymore. Your role is to guard your sanctuary. If his words feel like they're trying to reignite a connection without repairing what broke it, that's a red flag disguised as a welcome mat. And you've learned through your silence to spot that disguise quickly. One of the greatest missteps is mistaking attention for intention. Just because he's thinking of you doesn't mean he values you. Just because he reaches out doesn't mean he's ready to meet you where you are. And that's why you don't get caught up in nostalgia. Memory can be a dangerous lens. It filters the past through what you missed, not what you survived. But your growth didn't happen so you could step back into what hurt you. Your growth happened so you could recognize that your peace is not up for negotiation. When he speaks, assess whether his words come with responsibility or just sentiment. Is there recognition of how he made you feel? Is there accountability? Is he addressing what led to the silence, or is he bypassing it altogether? Avoid the temptation to fill in the emotional gaps. If he's vague, don't give his words more meaning than they hold. If he's casual, don't overlay hope onto half-effort communication. Evaluate based on what is, not what you wish it could be. Learning to read energy means stepping into emotional leadership. You are no longer the one seeking closure. You are the one who decides whether this door even needs to be opened. You don't need to make him feel comfortable. You don't need to soften your truth to keep the peace. Your energy has changed. You've become someone who values clarity over chemistry, alignment over attachment. That's the silent power you now carry. It radiates before you even say a word. If his words carry hesitation, confusion, or half-heartedness, you feel it. You don't deny it. You don't excuse it. You don't tell yourself stories to justify his presence. You lean into that inner wisdom you've cultivated, because energy, when you're grounded, becomes your guide. You don't fall for potential, you respond to consistency. You no longer respond to people just because they reach out. You respond only when the energy they bring matches the version of you that silence built. When someone breaks the silence and reaches out to you, it often stirs something deep within. The emotional residue that you thought had settled suddenly resurfaces. Maybe it's excitement, maybe it's anxiety, but underneath it all is a powerful urge to respond, to prove that you were worth returning to. But that urge is a trap if it's not checked by awareness. Because the moment you reply impulsively, emotionally, without alignment, you surrender your energy. And the truth is, silence doesn't end when someone speaks. It ends when you decide how to respond. This is where the true inner work begins. It's no longer about what he said. It's about what his words awaken in you. And whether or not you allow that awakening to pull you backward or push you forward. In the moments before you respond, something critical happens. Your mind races with questions. What does he want? Is he being sincere? Does this mean we're going to fix things? The human tendency is to fill in gaps with imagination. But maturity means you pause, you observe, you reflect, you give yourself the gift of space between the trigger and the reaction. Because just as silence from him taught you patience, Your silence in return teaches you mastery. It is the space where self-respect breathes. And without self-respect, any message you send is laced with neediness, even if it's dressed in confidence. People feel your energy more than they read your words. If you're applying from a place of fear, fear of losing him again, fear of being alone, fear of missing a second chance, your response will reflect that energy, whether you mean for it to or not. Your tone, your choice of words, your timing, it all becomes a mirror of your emotional state. And that's why it's dangerous to respond immediately, especially when your inner world is still unsettled. Emotional clarity takes time, and your power lies in waiting until you're centered. Until you know that you're not responding just to feel connected, but to remain connected to your truth. There's an internal battle you'll likely face in these moments. Part of you will want to be kind, to be open, to meet him halfway. That part remembers the good times, the laughter, the intimacy. But another part, the stronger part, remembers the silence, the confusion, the days when you questioned your worth because someone chose not to communicate. That part remembers how long it took to reclaim your peace. And that part deserves your loyalty, because that is the part of you that grew in the darkness. Responding with power doesn't mean being cold. It doesn't mean being arrogant or distant. It means being intentional. It means responding from a place of fullness, not lack. It means speaking from a foundation, not a wound. And the foundation you built during the silence was made of self-respect, boundaries, and emotional discipline. That foundation is your protection. It's what ensures you don't mistake breadcrumbs for love or mixed signals for divine timing. Sometimes your most powerful response is no response at all, because you've learned that not everyone who returns deserves access. Just because someone finds the courage to speak doesn't mean they've earned the right to be heard. And this is a hard truth. Some people break the silence not because they care, but because they sense your detachment. Energy doesn't lie. When you pull away fully, when your vibration rises, people feel the loss of access to your spirit. And sometimes they come back not to build, but to feed off that energy again. You must be wise enough to discern the difference. Before you respond, you must ground yourself in one question. What do I stand to lose if I let this back in? Not in a dramatic sense, but in a soulful one. Does it cost you your clarity, your healing, your progress, your peace? Because when you've worked this hard to stabilize your emotions, to find joy without them, to sleep at night without wondering, you cannot afford to reintroduce confusion just because the silence ended. The end of silence is not always the beginning of reconciliation. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a test. A test to see whether you really learned the lesson the silence came to teach. Every time you respond, you're making a statement, not just to him, but to yourself. You're declaring what you believe about your worth, your standards, your growth. That's why your response has to come from alignment. If it doesn't feel like peace, it's not the right moment. If it doesn't feel empowering, it's not the right energy. And if it doesn't sound like truth, it's not your voice speaking. So pause, breathe, return to yourself before you return to him. Because your response isn't just a message, it's a reflection of everything you've become in the silence. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone who once overlooked it. That's a truth you must let settle deep into your spirit. When he breaks the silence, the old version of you might feel this rush of urgency, this unspoken pressure to show him what he missed, to act like you flourish without him, to say the right words, or behave in a way that earns his attention again. But this isn't about proving anything. Your growth isn't a performance. It's not a show for anyone who left you in silence to come back and applaud when it suits them. You don't owe a presentation of your progress. The real power is in your peace, your detachment, and your ability to remain grounded in your value, with or without acknowledgement. Trying to prove your worth is a quiet act of desperation, even if it's disguised in confidence. When you're still looking for recognition from the one who once withheld it, you're still handing over your power. It's a hidden contract that says, see me now, love me now, choose me now. But what happens if he doesn't? What happens if he returns just to dip into your energy, to ease his guilt, or to test the waters, only to leave again? When your worth is tied to someone else's validation, your emotional state becomes fragile because it rises and falls with their choices. But when your worth is self-sustained, your peace remains unshaken, regardless of who enters or exits your life. Let's be clear. If someone truly values you, they won't make you question your place in their life. They won't go silent and then reappear with vague words and no accountability. And even if they do return with clarity and sincerity, your worth was never in question to begin with. It was constant all along. Their ability to see it or not does not change its existence. That's the lesson. That's the liberation. You don't need to become more, say more, give more, or prove more to make someone finally realize what they had. If they couldn't see your value when you were authentic, when you were present, when you gave freely, that's not your burden to carry. When he reaches out after a long silence, it's easy to fall into the emotional trap of trying to look unbothered, unaffected, or even elevated. You might feel the need to craft a message that sounds like success. You might want to drop hints about how much better your life has become without him. How many people want your time now? How strong and glowing you've become. But underneath that desire is a hidden hope that he'll finally get it, finally chase you, finally change. That's not empowerment. That's still a form of emotional dependency masked in pride. Real power is silent. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't perform for attention. It simply is. You have nothing to prove because your worth is not up for negotiation. It doesn't rise with compliments or fall with criticism. It exists with or without applause. When someone leaves and then returns, they are walking into the atmosphere you've built in their absence. If you've done the work, if you've healed, grown, and reclaimed your power, then they will feel the difference. Not because you're trying to prove it, but because it radiates from how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you set boundaries, and how you no longer abandon yourself for the sake of connection. This is where your discernment must be strong. Just because he comes back doesn't mean he's changed. Just because he says the right things doesn't mean the foundation is solid. People often return not because they've realized your value, but because they feel the emptiness of your absence. That's a big difference. Real transformation is revealed through consistent actions, not temporary feelings. If someone had the strength to stay away and ignore your presence, then they must also understand that re-entering your life comes with responsibility, and you have every right to demand that, not through anger, but through unwavering standards. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone returns is simply observe. Observe how they speak. how they show up, how they handle your silence. You don't need to rush to respond, to comfort, or to give them access again. The way they respond to your energy now will tell you everything you need to know. And in that stillness, you'll realize just how far you've come. Because the old version of you would have jumped at the chance to reconnect. But the healed version knows that closure isn't about getting someone back, it's about getting yourself back. You were never hard to love. You were just offering your love to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. That's not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of their unreadiness. And now that you're whole on your own, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. The moment you realize this, you stop seeking approval and start honoring your own journey. You move with confidence that doesn't scream, it whispers, it flows, and it holds firm. You'll understand that silence taught you more than any conversation ever could. It taught you that your worth was never lost. It was just waiting for you to remember it. Silence has a way of maturing you in ways noise never could. It teaches you patience, endurance, and how to sit with yourself without distractions. And when that silence is finally broken by the very person who initiated the void, it stirs up old emotions, but it also brings with it a crucial decision. Do you step back into the emotional chaos, or do you protect the peace you fought so hard to build? What most don't realize is that peace isn't found, it's created. You crafted it during the silence. You pieced it together when you had to heal without answers, forgive without apologies, and release without closure. That kind of peace is sacred, and it must be guarded with wisdom, not impulsive emotion. When someone returns, their voice may bring a familiar comfort, a nostalgia that tempts you to believe that maybe, just maybe, things can go back to how they were. But that's the trick of the mind. The longing isn't always for the person, it's for the feeling they once gave you. And that feeling might not even exist anymore. Sometimes what we miss is not love, but the illusion of love. We crave connection, validation, closure, but in truth, the silence gave you all of that just in a different form. It taught you that you could survive disappointment. It showed you that your heart could beat without their words. It reminded you that your healing never depended on their return, but on your own decision to choose yourself every day. Protecting your peace means understanding that not every re-entry into your life deserves a welcome. You're allowed to assess whether this return is meant to build something or just stir the pot. Not every message is a gesture of change. Sometimes it's just a check-in to see if they still have emotional access to you. And access is a privilege, not a right. The moment you allow someone back in without discernment, you run the risk of repeating old cycles dressed in new apologies. True growth isn't measured by who reaches out first. It's measured by how you respond when they do. You are not obligated to respond just because someone finally finds the courage to speak. Silence from you can be just as powerful, especially when it's rooted in clarity, not bitterness. Clarity is what allows you to see through the words and into the intentions. It allows you to ask yourself, does this contribute to my peace or compromise it? That one question can save you from falling back into emotional traps that once consumed you. Because sometimes the person who returns is still carrying the same patterns, the same wounds, and the same avoidance that led to the silence in the first place. Peace is not always loud. It doesn't always come with grand gestures or long conversations. Sometimes it looks like you waking up without anxiety. Sometimes it's you not checking your phone every 5 minutes or not losing your appetite over someone else's emotional inconsistency. It's subtle, it's quiet, but it's powerful. And when someone disrupts that, even unintentionally, you have every right to protect it fiercely. That might mean delaying your response. That might mean asking hard questions. That might even mean walking away from the conversation entirely. Protecting your peace is about honoring the version of you that emerged from the silence, stronger, wiser, and more grounded. Many people confuse forgiveness with access. Just because you've let go of resentment doesn't mean you have to let someone back into your space. Forgiveness is internal. It's something you do for yourself to release emotional weight. But access is external. It's about boundaries, energy, and alignment. You can forgive someone completely and still choose not to engage with them again. That decision doesn't make you cold. It makes you self-aware. It means you've learned that peace isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about avoiding patterns that lead to inner chaos. Emotional boundaries are the gatekeepers of your peace. And boundaries don't always look like walls. They look like self-respect. They look like pausing before replying. They look like trusting your intuition when something feels off, even if the words sound right. They look like being willing to walk away again, not because you're angry, but because you love your peace more than you fear being alone. That's what maturity does. It helps you prioritize your mental and emotional well-being over temporary emotional satisfaction. The journey to inner peace often involves painful decisions. You might still care, you might still have questions, but you must weigh every emotional interaction against the peace you've built. Ask yourself, is this conversation going to lead to clarity or confusion? Is it going to ground me or shake me? The answers to these questions will guide you better than any impulse or emotional high. Because protecting your peace doesn't always feel good in the moment. It might even feel like loss, but in reality, it's the highest form of self-love. What you've built in the silence is irreplaceable. It's made of lessons, breakthroughs, nights you cried yourself to sleep, but still woke up and moved forward. That kind of healing deserves your protection. Don't trade it for temporary comfort or the illusion of connection. Stand firm in it, trust it. Let it guide your responses, your choices, your boundaries. Because when you protect your peace, you don't just shield yourself from chaos, you affirm to the universe that you're finally ready to receive only what aligns with the highest version of yourself.